Hello and welcome to a 0 to 100% DC fast charging test of the Hyundai IONIQ 5. You guys know we love to look at not only the peak speeds electric cars can have, this one's rated at 235 kilowatt peak, but we also like to look at the curve. And this matters more than the peak speed in my opinion. It's how much area is under the curve, how quickly can you charge on average throughout a session. So what we're gonna do is drive this IONIQ 5 all the way down to 0 until it's completely dead. We're then gonna plug it in and charge it until it's at 100% and look at what happens in the middle. This is a little bit more complicated than your standard EV charging curve test because it's very dynamic and very variable. So I will do my best to explain some of the variabilities, if that's a word, with the IONIQ 5's charging situation. We'll look at the curve, we'll analyze it, and I actually have a couple other sessions I think I want to reference throughout this video to try and get a better picture of how this car charges.
Hey, do you want more automotive content? Maybe some car talk in your ears for a workout. Or maybe you enjoy driving cars while listening to people talk about cars. Well, check out the Out of Spec podcast. We have it on video form on YouTube, of course. But we're also on podcast platforms to listen to in case you can't have a screen in front of your face. So check it out, Out of Spec podcast, available everywhere. Now, back to whatever you were doing.
Guys, it's time to evaluate the IONIQ 5's charging curve and some of the things I've been learning throughout my testing. This is more of a ongoing story, not one that's going to be totally comparable, or I should say really relevant in years to come, because I'm sure we'll see software updates. But let's evaluate the car with things that I've found. And I first want to start with my first time charging the IONIQ 5, which was 6 months ago, and it wasn't an IONIQ 5. It was a Kia EV6. And this was in Europe. I was at a Ionity station. I have a whole video on this channel I'll link to below. And I did a 0 to 100% curve, and I was trying to figure out why it was derating and doing all this weird stuff. And one of the big questions I had when I was charging that EV6, which I'm pretty sure is identical or near as makes no difference to the US spec batteries that we were driving here, although I believe IONIQ 5 may have a different European battery pack. The EV6 I drove, I think, was a US spec battery. And one of the big questions I had was around 80% state of charge, we would see this weird dip to 1 kilowatt or 4 kilowatts, and it was basically just stopping charging. And then it would peak up, and then it would come down. It was odd behavior, and it was repeatable. And I asked some engineers about this, and they said it's not to prevent lithium plating. That was a theory that you guys and I came up with at the time. That was not the case. What it was is just a battery check. They're just making sure that the modules within the pack were balanced before they charged it above 80%. And one thing I will say is I noticed that behavior, I believe, I'm trying to remember, I will link to the charging session after. We'll actually analyze that together here. I believe I experienced that with a US spec IONIQ 5 when I charged that vehicle, when I drove it for the first time, where I made my first review. I brought it to an Electrify America station at 0%. So what we're going to do in this video is analyze two different 0 to 100% charging curves, both on the IONIQ 5. And the first one we're going to evaluate is what we just shot on the newest software. Although I asked some people at Hyundai about this, and I'm not sure 100% if I totally am buying it or not, but we updated Zach's car with a 32 gigabyte software update. They claim that was just for the head unit, version 7 up from version 1. And 32 gigs for the head unit seems like a lot. Not saying it's not possible, but it seems like there might be more to the story. But again, this is an ongoing story. We're going to be testing this car in warm weather on road trips. And yes, Ellie is in the back. She's saying hello to everyone. So what do you say we start with this? The first thing to keep in mind from what I've found with charging IONIQ 5 is it seems to be very sensitive to temperature, more than other electric cars. The first problem is there's no on-route battery preconditioning for DC fast charging. There is a winter mode, I think just in all-wheel drive cars, that does bring the battery temperature up, but it's definitely not like trying to get it to 30, 40, 50 degrees Celsius before a fast charging session, etc. Now, the other side of this is you don't want it to come in too hot because you would fry the battery pack charging it fast. And after talking to some Hyundai charging engineers about this a few months ago, they were like, why even bother trying to figure out how this car charges? Because there's so much variability, and every charging session is going to be totally different, and you just can't take one session as gospel like we can with e-tron, with Tesla stuff, with Taycan stuff. Because the problem with the IONIQ 5 is because it's so temperature sensitive, and because it can accept such a peak theoretical charging rate at such a large portion of the curve, let's just say all conditions are ideal, it can pretty much take max power from like 0 to 75% ish is kind of where my feeling is. And it doesn't have the thermal capacity to handle that much current running into the pack for that long. So this is actually a car that I think doesn't make sense to run down to 0 on road trips. I think this is a 10 to 15% plug-in situation and ride a good curve up to 80%. The problem is it's very hard to repeatedly get a great charging session out of this car, and we're doing it in cold weather. So here's the thing to keep in mind. We charged this car on this first charging session that we're going to analyze together in the morning. That was our cold Kate video. We unplugged it around 50% state of charge, I believe. Nearest makes no difference. Zach drove it in sport mode, super hard, in winter mode to try and get as much heat into the system as possible. And Zach's arriving now after driving it pretty hard on the way down. What are you at?
0%, 0 range.
Oh, so everything's zeroed out, power limited. And how hard did you drive it? You think the pack's pretty warm?
Yeah, it's definitely warm.
So I wonder if it's too warm. This will be the question. We don't know. But what do you say we get this thing plugged in, get the cameras up, and see how she charges from 0 to full as a baseline test?
Battle of the temperatures.
Battle of the temperatures. We'll explain, of course. One of the things we've learned about the IONIQ 5 is if you drive it, or I should say charge it with the air conditioning on, it diverts a lot of cooling power to the cabin. So we've made sure climate control's off, car is off. It can do what it needs to do to cool down the battery pack. We have everything ready to go over here. So let's get the camera set and we'll be ready to go. We then plugged in the car. Let's analyze what we found. So let me cue this up here. We're going to start as soon as the session starts, and I'm just loading it up, and boom. So let's do this thing, play. So we plug in, we instantly go right up to 67 kilowatts. It doesn't hold 0% for long because we didn't really drain the car that much past 0. Our testing procedures are always plug in as soon as the car dips to 0, and that seemed to be consistent here. We're sitting at 70 kilowatts, which I had not seen before. I think the pack may have been actually a little bit cold here, and that's actually fine because we do want to have some thermal capacity up top to really analyze the meat of the charging pack. The problem is, if for whatever reason the charging session doesn't heat up the pack enough, it means that there's going to be higher resistance in the pack at higher states of charge when it's colder, not based on state of charge, but it means it may not be able to accept max power later on into the pack. Anyway, we're still sitting at 75 kilowatts at 10% here, and this is where I was like, something's wrong, but then instantly we got to jump up to 121. And so there is some pre-programmed logic here in the IONIQ 5 that's determining how much current it wants in these sort of steps, and I think the steps are based off of temperature. Hyundai claims 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. I've seen it do that. I've verified physically that the car can do that at the first drive. It wasn't on any session that I've logged, though, because I like to plug in at 0. I want to see the full curve. And on cars like this, it requires multiple charging sessions to get an idea of the theoretical max. The thing is, you will never get a perfect charging session on this car because you'll always max it out. Here at 23%, we shot up to 193 kilowatts. The thing to keep in mind here is this is insanely good. Really good charging speeds. IONIQ 5 is a charging monster. We're already blowing past ID4 Mach-E. Only the Model Y in this category can charge faster than the IONIQ 5 by 10 kilowatt peak, and Tesla doesn't hold it that long. Look at this, 36%. We're jumping up. By this point in the Tesla, we've already tapered down. So we're seeing 230, but you can see it's quite variable here. It's not liking the power for some reason. And we're sitting at around 227, 228. It's stabilizing there. And 228 kilowatts at 45%, that's crazy. In a Tesla, we're seeing 150 kilowatts or maybe even 100 kilowatts at 50%. We're doing 228. in this. And we're talking both long-range pack pigbacks. So even with this quite odd charging session, this is still insane. We're down to 149 kilowatts at 55. And here's where my theory is one of two things. New software to the car, but also, and I'm not guaranteed that that changes charging, and Hyundai told me it doesn't, so let's assume that's not the case. Also, now we're back up to 177 kilowatts. I think this is a thermal situation. I think the car is too cold, actually, and I think it's just really hard to heat up this battery pack, 180 kilowatts. I will mention that the cable cooling on the actual unit was not blasting as hard as we've seen from other units where it goes zzz, and it was warm to the touch, and it's possible that we were derating due to handle. You just never know. This is what we experience. It's the only 350 kilowatt unit within like 80 miles of my house. There's only one working. The other one next to it isn't. But look at this, 152 kilowatts at close to 80%. We saw at 80% in EV6, 150 kilowatts. This is right on what we've seen before. So we know the car can charge really well up top. And then at 80%, we start to dip down to 120. This is a car you charge to 80%, you unplug, and you go without question. But still well over 100 kilowatts after 80% state of charge. Now I feel like we're walking down a normal path. I think the pack's warm enough. This is to be expected. Seems pretty good. Couple things I'd like to see from IONIQ 5. I'd like to see plug-in charge capability with Electrify America, where I can just plug the car in. It comes with 2 years of free 30-minute charging. The second would be on-route battery preconditioning. And actually, the third, while we're at it, give us a good route planner. When I put in a destination, if I want to get to LA from here in Fort Collins, Colorado, give me a good route plan. Tell me where to stop and how long I have to stop and how many people are at the chargers. To me, this is pretty elementary, but I don't know. Here at 90%, we're just dipping under 50 kilowatts, and then we'll kind of finish off into the end. And I have to say, that's a pretty good charging curve. Now, Hyundai says, I did get some extra info out of them. They're not really supposed, for whatever reason, they're instructed not to tell us the usable and gross capacity of the battery pack. 77 kilowatt hours is usable. They didn't say that verbatim, but I pretty much got it out of them. It's 77 kilowatt hour usable battery pack, plus or minus a couple watt hours, 100 watt hours here or there. The reason this charger is going to be delivering more than 77 kilowatt hours is because there's charging losses throughout the thing. The car's got to run heat pumps, but it's not much. I think we actually ended up putting about 79 or 80 kilowatt hours into this thing. Very minimal losses. Also, the car wasn't drained all the way down to zero, but we went from 0 to 95% in 38 minutes, 39 minutes. We're talking well under an hour for a 0 to full charge. This is incredible. This car is insanely good charging. And while it may not be as efficient as a Model Y, it may not have the range of a Mustang Mach-E, which has a much larger pack. It might be sort of on par with an ID4. It's going to smoke any of them on a road trip just because of this charging. And a lot of people say, well, you may not be able to find 350 kilowatt chargers. In my experience, look, we drove a Taycan across the country when we did the Cannonball record with that car. We had 350 kilowatts at every single station except for one across the entire country, and very few cars that we've seen. I think we're going to start doing some road trip races with this against Mach-E, against ID4, against Model Y, if you kind of want to see us battle the networks, test the cars, and show. I really think the IONIQ 5 has quite an interesting advantage over the other cars, and that's its charging capabilities. And I think no one doubts that. What's hard, though, is to repeatably get a quote-unquote perfect charging session. It doesn't seem to be really possible. Here we are at 48 minutes at 99%, still doing 15 kilowatts at 99%, by the way. We've dumped about 80 kilowatt hours through the handle, and there we go, our full charging session, 79 point something kilowatt hours. That's an insane charging session, and it's still not even perfect for the car. That's the most incredible part, is just how much of a monster this thing truly is. And this is cold temperatures. I mean, obviously, we drove the car really hard to warm it up. Now, my friend and colleague at Inside EVs, Tom Malagny, has been doing some charging testing with IONIQ 5 during the same exact time we did. There was different software on the car, although, again, they say that doesn't affect the battery pack. And a big stretch over here from Ellie. the question here, though, is why wasn't Tom, I don't know if his video is going to be up by this point, but it wasn't as good as what we found. He didn't see anything close to the charging performance that we found. And that could be a station problem. It could be a car problem. It could be so many things in between. The problem is it's really hard for anyone to tell you. We can't really pull the logs on the car. One of the things I'd like to actually start doing, and I think that we will going forwards, and we'll continue to do this with the IONIQ 5 because it's our friend Zach who's he works with us now, and so like we'll have the car around to analyze. We're going to start doing OBD scanning. We're going to start looking at the data that the car is presenting, and so we can look at thermals. We no longer have to guess. And while there's not temperature sensors everywhere and not every car can show all the data, I think it's really going to help us analyze these charging sessions a little bit better. So that's session number 1 that we're analyzing. It's our most recent one, and I would say arguably one of the best. But I want to, in contrast, analyze another charging session. And this was one that I shot during the vehicle's first drive experience in, where was I? Basically Tijuana. It was south of San Diego. Right on the Mexican border, and warm day. I had driven the car from pretty much 100% state of charge to 0 with the heater on, absolutely ripping it. Everyone else is pulling in at 40, 50, 60% state of charge, and they're like, how are you at 1? I'm like, come on, we got to do some testing here, folks. And so they had a little demonstration of a car that was perfectly conditioned to go from 10 to 18% in front of the media, 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. And the car did that, and I was there to physically witness it. But there were Electrify America representatives on site. They closed the station down for us. It wasn't like a real world, I'm going to roll up and do a test, but at least we know the car can accept it. And I have to say, Electrify America reliability is getting significantly better. A lot of people are still pretty harsh on the network, and deservedly so. If you roll up to a station and it doesn't work, look, that's not really acceptable in my opinion. But a lot of it is the cars. We have a lot of new cars coming out. I think my impression is it's becoming more reliable. I really don't think about it when I road trip CCS cars now. I'm comfortable. Anyway, with that aside, here we are in Mexico. No, California, but basically Mexico, doing this charging session. Plug in, and I want you to watch the starting state of charge. So car starts charging now. We're at 60, 70, 80, 100 plus kilowatts, 200 plus kilowatts, 215 at 2%. We were only seeing 60 before. This is what makes me think either the software is different or the car wasn't at optimal temperature. 220 kilowatts at 7%. This is like insane. You're plugging in, you're going down low. This is like Taycan levels where you plug that thing in at 0. The problem is, though, is this can actually, I think, sustain more power longer theoretically through the curve than Taycan. Taycan has better thermal capacity, though. It has a bigger battery pack, better cooling, in my opinion, based off my research so far. So Taycan's probably an averagely faster charging EV, and it might be more efficient at speed. I'm not sure. That would be an interesting race because we're close enough, but the IONIQ 5 is significantly cheaper than a big battery Taycan. Here, look, it's doing weird stuff, 217, 180, going up and down. You have to forgive some of the video cutting in and out, but this is a big deal. I'm going to pause it here. The charging session bricked. And it bricked not only to my car, but to another car on another station around the same state of charge. And we have not seen this behavior since then. So I don't know if it's something that's been fixed. But actually, one of the reasons I never posted this video, and I actually waited until now, was because we didn't get a true full 0 to 100 without it stopping. And I thought that was quite a bummer. And yeah, so we added 22 kilowatt hours in 6 minutes, absolutely shredding. And again, this was during the event. So I unplugged and I plugged back in. Again, we stopped charging. Let me just take a look at 230 kilowatts, 217 when it bricked. And it was like doing this weird thing. So I don't know if it was a communication thing or the car was, again, maybe on early software freaking the charging out. It's hard to say. Hyundai claims that the vehicles that are in the media fleet right now are on the same software than that were at the first drive event that I went to. However, the car I drove on the first drive event just seeing if they made any updates to the car, was on a Michelin Pilot Sport EV specific tire. The car Tom, my colleague, had to test this week in New Jersey was on a non-EV specific tire. Both cars limited, same tire size. And it's possible they just have 2 approved tires for that. A lot of times, manufacturers can't source enough of one tire. They need to diversify, of course, so you don't have production stopping because a tire manufacturer can't get you the tire, whatever it is. It's very common, and that very well could be the case. But I'm just saying, it's interesting that I drove a car in an EV specific tire and Tom has a car without, and my guess is it would actually make a difference in how the car performs. But this is just my guess. We're initiating charging again for the second time after the brick. We're going up 100 and 200 kilowatts, 224, right back up to it. And so that's kind of where we left off. So the car's happy there, and it's rocking. We're at 30%. But whoa, huge dip to 169 instantly, like that, out of nowhere. Not sure what's going on there. And now we're sitting at 170 going through this way. So why is the car sort of dropping down these ledges here? Well, I was with, again, some of the Hyundai engineers when I shot this, and we all sort of agreed, yeah, the car's just getting hot, and I probably drove it too hard, and by the time we got to 35-40%, we've got the battery pack in the red. Again, I had climate control off to try and divert as much cooling power to the battery pack system as possible during this time, because if you have climate control on, it basically takes the battery's heating and cooling ability away from it to keep you warm. And this is where I'm thinking maybe the Achilles heel of the IONIQ 5, just a guess, could be its thermal capabilities. And we're just sitting around, 170 kilowatts. And I think that's probably its nice, happy medium. But we've seen pretty good charging around here, I have to say. So, still nothing to complain about. Cruising at 100 and something kilowatts. What are we at? 170 at 60% state of charge. That's awesome. And it's still rocking through. I'm just going to cruise through here a little bit, and we'll see our next ledge. Yeah, right about 67% state of charge. Let's see, my computer's going a little bit slow here. We're at 115. Again, keep in mind, at our previous charging session, we saw 150 kilowatts at 78% state of charge. Now we're at 115 at 70. So definitely it's throttling either due to the station or the car. My guess in this case is the car is just hot and it's not, maintaining over 200 something kilowatts. The big question for me is what's going to happen on a road trip. I want to go 70 miles an hour after leaving a charging station at 80% state of charge and then cruise along the highway, at about 70, 75 miles an hour highway speeds and plug into another charger at 10%. I think that's what the car is optimized for. A pretty healthy highway stretch in between chargers to let everything cool down on a hot, warm day, and then basically it'll go back up. Here we are at 80% at 114 kilowatts, 81 at 115. This is where we're going to see if it dips to 1% or not, or 1 kilowatt or not, excuse me. And I don't actually remember. Yes, it does. Here we are at 83%, dipping to 7 kilowatts, 6 kilowatts. And this is a big distinction from when I drove the car on the first drive to Zach's car. And I'd be curious what you guys are seeing. Again, this is the same behavior we experienced with the Kia EV6 that I spoke about earlier in this video, dipping down. And it's doing this for 160 seconds or 300 seconds. I can't remember which. And what it's supposed to essentially be doing is providing the car enough energy for it to run its cooling systems, its pumps, whatever ancillary loads are on there. But what it's doing is it's basically checking the voltages of the pack, not putting anything into the battery. And then it shoots up and we're at 69 kilowatts at 87%. And so that's fairly normal there. There's a couple questions for me. Hyundai saying there's no software update to the drivetrain battery pack charging. But we're seeing almost proof of it where it was repeatable where the car would dip down to single kilowatt digits. And it's not doing that for Zach's car, as we just watched. That's an interesting one. Secondly, we're noticing that the car might have a little bit better performance at low state of charge. It could just be a temperature thing, not a huge deal. And then we'll let this charging session finish off. Again, nothing fancy. It's just ramping itself down like we've seen before. So the story continues, right? It's hard to gauge, I think, what really the summary is a perfect charging session in real life with the IONIQ 5. And does it matter? Well, I think it does for me because I'd like to know how a car charges so I can plan my road tripping, so I can understand how I have to drive the car to set it up for the optimal time. I know a lot of you guys are interested in that. Some people who are new to electric cars just want to plug it in and know that it charges and charges well. And I think even on a bad day, the IONIQ 5 charges really well. Like this, we're just nitpicking here. But it is very interesting to notice all of the different behavior. I've DC charged every electric car in the market multiple times now, and what's interesting is this is the hardest one to get right because there's so much of a thermal influence on this charging session. Don't get me wrong, other electric cars, when they're cold, charge slow. When you overheat them, charge slow. But typically I can get the cars in the right scenario to maximize them, and that's kind of my thing. This is a really tough one to diagnose and to sort of pull apart. Overall, though, IONIQ 5 is a charging monster, no question. But don't be chasing, maybe you should be chasing. I will be, of course, but don't fret about what happens in the middle. If you're seeing north of 150 kilowatts, 200 kilowatts, you're getting good speeds and the car is fine. It's just really hard to thermally control. And so there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the IONIQ 5. I'm curious what you guys think. I really hope you leave some comments down below with your experiences, what you're finding at different states of charge and different temperatures. Most of the time, you guys will actually put these charging logs into charts for me because I don't, but you guys do. And if you do, shoot me an email, info@outofspecstudios.com. I will include the charts in the description of this video. You guys are usually pretty quick about it. Someone gets it within the first few hours. And I would really appreciate that so we can kind of compare the data. Overall, though, I like the IONIQ 5, really do. And we should have a Kia EV6 here for testing in the next few weeks as well. We'll be doing some comparisons, some range testing, efficiency testing. The story is just beginning. If you're liking this content, please subscribe because we're only going to be doing more and more of it. Ellie says thank you very much for watching. And I don't know why all these beer cans are over here with balloons, but I think Timon, who's out of frame now, is doing some kind of experiment. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.